Many will probably say that I lived a very privileged childhood growing up. Lived in Tasmania, on 25 acres out in the country, overlooking the Tasman Sea and the Southern Ocean. And our home was very much being a scientist's home. Both of my parents conducted research at the University of Tasmania, and to make it more interesting, often they would bring their colleagues or postgrad students over to the house and basically conduct squid dissections in the living room kitchen. They would cover the benches with tarps and stuff, but that didn't really interest me. It kind of grossed me out. I didn't like that. And so I was interested in the wildlife. I'd wake up every morning to like the deafening noise of cockatoos and kookaburras singing away, and that's what really interested me. I loved the wildlife. But for the most part, in those younger years growing up there, God wasn't really a part of my life. It's true that I grew up in an Adventist home, went to a conservative church, but the problem was that church that was considered conservative was also fairly Laodicean. They didn't see any need for change, and so neither did we. Well, neither did I should say. And I remember they would conduct evangelistic series, and absolutely nobody would come. And so outreach and evangelism wasn't really part of my life at that point, and I didn't have that spiritual guidance from my soul personally. And so then other things began to take that place in my life. And I could say it really all started when I turned 12. I got my first camera for my birthday, and from there, I began photographing the wildlife in the house that surrounded, in the bush that surrounded our house. And I have to say I progressed fairly quickly in the photography, because by the time I was still only 12, I had published a calendar with all my bird pictures and stuff in there, and I was aspiring to be Australia's next best wildlife photographer. That was my goal. And then we moved to Canada, and I continued my love for photography there on Vancouver Island, which is also another very beautiful island, similar to Tasmania in some ways. And so I spent hours researching the best photography technique. I knew the equipment so well that I could see a camera from like across the street and know the exact the make, model, when it was made, the specs of it, and basically anything there was to know about it. And so it really consumed my whole life. I would spend hours in the woods just waiting for the perfect shot. And so I started getting interested in publishing my pictures then, and I had my pictures published in one of the biggest birdwatching magazines in the US. And so in my mind, I was quickly becoming the photographer that I wanted to be. And then you could say another God, per se, came into my life, because photography consumed my whole life. Something else that consumed my whole life as well, and that was computer programming. And so that happened when I was about 14, and so anytime I wasn't taking pictures, I was basically programming websites, and that's what interested me at that time, and that's what I spent all my time doing. And so I'd often hang out at my friend Tim's house, and we'd wake up at 7 and program until 1 a.m. the next morning with maybe 30 minutes here and there to eat some Big Franks, and that was about it. That was our lifestyle. And there was definitely no time for God in my life at that point in time, in my mind. And then, as I progressed in that as well, I began making money with that. I was programming websites, making money, $25 an hour sometimes. And I was just doing this at home, not really doing too much school either. I was pretty distracted. And so, and my devotional life is basically non-existent as well. And then, my parents made probably the best decision they could have ever made in my mind, and that was our move to Weimar. And at that point, I was able to suddenly have friends. Growing up in Tasmania as a homeschooler, you don't really have too many friends your age, so that was something new for me. And it was something I globbed onto really quickly, and I started hanging out with a group of friends that probably weren't the best. They weren't the greatest influence on my life, and at that point, after several months, maybe even a year of this taking place, I knew I really had to make a decision. I was getting older, and I finally had to decide which direction I was going to go. And so, at that point, I knew I needed to go the direction that God was calling me to. And so I spent more time with the college, and I was starting to realize what true Christianity can really look like in godly young people. It was a real inspiration to me. And as I spent more time with the college, I had the opportunity to go to Zimbabwe. That was an incredible experience for me, and a time when God was really able to shape my life. Our first trip there, as Weston mentioned earlier, we got in a bus crash, which is a whole other story, but that was just another example of how God was working in my life. And on that same trip, I was able to start spending more time in God's Word, and I realized the beauty that comes from spending time in the Word and prayer. And so I went to Zimbabwe again the next year, where even more interesting things happened. And as usual, I was doing photography, taking pictures. But this time, I photographed a police officer, which usually in the US is not a problem, but in Zimbabwe with a corrupt government, it's a little bit different. And so they drugged me out of the car when they saw I took the picture, and they had me on the side of the highway. We're in the middle of nowhere, hours from the closest city. And there I am, surrounded by about 5 police officers, being interrogated for about an hour by the side of the road. And I'm just like looking out over the savannah land, and I'm like, man, if I end up in jail here, what in the world is going to happen? And I'm like, I really don't want to do prison ministry out here. I'm happy to do it back in the US, but not here. And so then they finally realized that I wasn't an anti-government spy, and they let us go. And I realized that was another miracle that God had worked in my life. But it really started happening this last summer when I made the decision to go canvassing. It was there that I realized the need I had to really understand the scriptures, and the need I had to spend time in prayer and Bible study. And it was there that really developed, because people were asking me, like, how has this book changed your life? Or what is your favorite part of this book? And to be honest, it hadn't really changed my life. But at that point, God was starting to change my life. He had been over the course of my whole life, but it was there that I really started to see how he was wanting to change my life. And so I started spending hours in prayer, and that was where I really was able to start seeing the character of God and his ideal for my life. And in 2 Peter chapter 1, verses 7 and 8, he describes this joy after going through trials and so forth as an inexpressible joy, and that's what I felt. And so, as I look back over my life, I realized how that there is a God, and that he has led me this far.